Most people who followed the research on the 7 cancer defense foods have already started the protocol. Good choice made. But after 60, a process called Insulin Lock has been working against every one of those defenses before they reach the cells they were meant to protect. It is why the cancer defense protocol you have been running has not compensated for the immune patrol Insulin Lock has been suppressing at 40 to 50% of its designed capacity. It is why the borderline fasting insulin that no appointment had time to explain is actively promoting the vascular environment that microscopic tumor clusters use to become dangerous. And it is why the gut bacteria that research at one of the world's leading cancer centers identifies as the single most significant predictor of cancer treatment response has been quietly depleted by this process. In the years you believed the word borderline was not urgent. I am Dr. Michael Harrison, 34 years in clinical medicine, 20 of them focused on the specific biology of adults over 60. What I found when I looked closely at what Insulin Lock was doing to my patients' cancer defense systems is not something a 15-minute appointment has time to explain. That is why I am here. In this video, I am going to show you the compound that peer-reviewed research identifies as addressing the upstream insulin signal driving all 3 of those failures simultaneously. The exact standardized form the clinical trials used, the exact timing that determines whether any of it works, and the one mistake that makes this protocol fail in adults over 60 who do everything else exactly right. I hear from adults every week who watch several of these videos without subscribing. If what I just described is happening in your body right now, you cannot afford to miss what comes next. If this kind of evidence-based clinical analysis is useful to you, please subscribe. Do it now. Let me start with the first pathway, and with the number that makes it impossible to dismiss. Cancer cells are forming in your body right now, in my body too, in every adult over 60. This is not alarming, it is normal biology. You have roughly 40 trillion cells. They divide continuously to replace damaged tissue. During each division, copying errors occur. Some of those errors create abnormal cells. Some of those abnormal cells are technically cancerous. So why are most of us not dying of cancer right now? Because a microscopic tumor cannot hurt you until it solves one specific problem. It needs blood vessels. Without blood vessels, a tumor stays frozen at 1 to 2 millimeters, smaller than a grain of rice. It can sit there for years, decades, completely harmless. Because without a blood supply, it cannot access the oxygen, nutrients, or growth signals it needs to expand. The moment blood vessels reach that tumor, everything changes. Researchers at Harvard Medical School, tracking tumor growth rates using advanced imaging technology, documented that once blood vessels penetrate a tumor, growth increases by a factor of 16,000 in approximately 14 days. A cluster the size of a ballpoint pen tip becomes the size of a grape in 2 weeks. This mechanism has a name: angiogenesis, the controlled growth of new blood vessels. Your body regulates it precisely. Cancer cells hijack it by releasing VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor, a signal directing the body to grow new blood vessels toward the tumor. Pharmaceutical angiogenesis inhibitor drugs are now standard cancer treatment and can be effective, but they block VEGF systemically throughout the entire body, and the side effects, including elevated blood pressure, impaired wound healing, and increased clotting risk, reflect that. Here's the connection to Insulin Lock that most panels have never drawn. Research published in journals, including Cancer Research, has documented that chronically elevated insulin directly upregulates VEGF expression. Insulin Lock is not waiting for a tumor to send a construction signal. It is generating elevated VEGF in the broader biological environment, continuously, before any tumor has made a request. Think of VEGF as a construction permit for new blood vessels. Your body issues those permits only when genuine construction is needed. Insulin Lock floods the permit office. Tumors do not generate that flood. They are contractors at the window, ready to build the moment a permit clears. Insulin Lock fills the office every single day. I want to be precise here, because this is where health content regularly overstates the case. Elevated VEGF from insulin resistance does not guarantee vascularization of any specific cluster. What the research documents is a protective layer that has been systematically removed. The removed layer also matters. Insulin Lock has been removing that layer. Every year, the process runs unaddressed. But VEGF is only the first pathway. The second mechanism Insulin Lock opens does not operate on blood vessels at all. It operates on the immune patrol that was supposed to eliminate those clusters before they ever found the VEGF signal. Your body maintains continuous immune surveillance. Natural killer cells move through your bloodstream at all times, identifying abnormal cells and eliminating them before they become dangerous. This patrol is the reason most adults with microscopic cancer clusters never develop clinical cancer. The patrol finds them first. Insulin Lock disrupts this patrol through a specific mechanism. The visceral fat that accumulates with chronic insulin resistance produces inflammatory signaling molecules, including leptin and tumor necrosis factor alpha, that reduce natural killer cell cytotoxic activity. The patrol is not eliminated. It is impaired. The cells are still present. Their capacity to execute when they find a target is running at a fraction of its designed level. Research comparing adults with significant metabolic dysfunction to metabolically healthy adults of the same age as documented natural killer cell cytotoxic activity reductions in the range of 40 to 50%. That is not a marginal impairment. That is the difference between a fully staffed security team and a skeleton crew on the night shift. The microscopic clusters that a full capacity patrol would have found and cleared are the ones that remain with access to the elevated VEGF environment that Insulin Lock has already prepared for them. The first pathway and the second do not operate independently. They amplify each other simultaneously. Researchers at the University of Auckland studied athletes consuming 1.5 cups of blueberries daily for 6 weeks. After 6 weeks, circulating T cell counts increased by 88%. Natural killer cell activity was significantly elevated. The anthocyanins in blueberries are a real and documented mechanism, but adding them to a patrol that Insulin Lock is actively suppressing through visceral fat-driven inflammatory signaling is adding officers to a team whose operating capacity is being reduced faster than the reinforcements can replace. You address the source of the suppression first, then the patrol functions the way the research shows it was designed to. 2 paths, both running simultaneously under a villain that has never been named in most appointments. But the third mechanism Insulin Lock opens does not target blood vessels or immune surveillance. It targets a growth signal. And cancer cells were architecturally built to absorb that signal at a rate the healthy cells around them simply cannot match. There is a hormone your body produces to tell tissues to rebuild and repair. Insulin-like growth factor 1. After 60, insulin resistance drives compensatory insulin secretion. Elevated insulin cross-activates the insulin-like growth factor 1 pathway. The hormone stays chronically elevated at levels the body was not designed to sustain long-term. Cancer cells carry significantly more insulin-like growth factor 1 receptors than the healthy cells surrounding them. Think of it as a growth broadcast. Healthy cells receive the signal. Cancer cells have 5 times more antennas. The same broadcast is received at 5 times the intensity by the cells you cannot afford to grow. And Insulin Lock keeps that broadcast running at elevated volume, not for a day, not for a week, but chronically for years. Researchers at Harvard School of Public Health, publishing in the journal Science, followed 14,916 men enrolled in the Physicians' Health Study. Men in the highest quartile of circulating. Insulin-like growth factor 1 had 4.3 times the risk of developing prostate cancer compared to men in the lowest quartile. I want to be precise here. Elevated insulin-like growth factor 1 does not guarantee cancer in any individual. What the research documents is a statistically significant association across nearly 15,000 men followed over years. That is not a laboratory finding. That is a large-scale, peer-reviewed observation. The association is meaningful. The mechanism producing the elevation is addressable. GLP-1 receptor agonist medications, the class generating the most attention in metabolic medicine right now, address insulin sensitivity pharmaceutically. Downstream, this affects insulin-like growth factor 1 signaling. The pharmaceutical magnitude is different from a dietary approach. That is precisely why the dietary approach is a daily capsule and not a prescription intervention. 3 pathways, but the fourth is the one that connected everything I described to research you may have already encountered. Research that explained why 2 cancer patients, the same diagnosis, the same hospital, the same drug, ended up with entirely different outcomes. The answer had nothing to do with the cancer. It had to do with one specific gut bacteria and what Insulin Lock has been doing to it. Akkermansia muciniphila. Researchers at the Gustave Roussy Cancer Center in France, publishing in the journal Science, studied patients receiving immunotherapy. The only variable that correlated significantly with treatment outcome between patients who responded dramatically and patients who did not respond at all was the presence of Akkermansia muciniphila in the gut. Patients with it present responded. In some cases, cancer eliminated after 3 treatments. Patients without it showed essentially no response. Same drug, same hospital, same diagnosis. The gut dysbiosis that Insulin Lock drives through chronic metabolic inflammation is specifically associated with reduced Akkermansia populations. The bacteria is not depleted by chance. It is depleted by a named, addressable metabolic process, progressively, over years, before any standard panel measures it. Think of Akkermansia as the gatekeeper that calibrates your immune system's ability to execute a precise attack, not a blunt immune response, a targeted, high-efficiency elimination of specific cells the immune system has been signaled to find. Insulin Lock creates the metabolic environment that evicts that gatekeeper, quietly, in the years when it matters most. If you followed the research on pomegranate and Akkermansia and started drinking pomegranate juice every morning, good choice made. The L-tannins in pomegranate feed Akkermansia. The mechanism is real, but if Insulin Lock is maintaining the metabolic environment hostile to Akkermansia colonization, you are rebuilding the gatekeeper with one hand while the other continues the eviction. The gut bacteria responds to both what you add and the metabolic environment you provide. Both variables matter. 4 pathways, 1 villain. VEGF overproduction, natural killer cell suppression, insulin-like growth factor 1 elevation, Akkermansia depletion. All 4 running simultaneously under Insulin Lock in adults whose metabolic panels have been saying borderline for years without explaining why that word carries this much weight. The compound that peer-reviewed research identifies as addressing insulin sensitivity through the same metabolic pathway GLP-1 receptor agonist medications target, through a different, non-pharmaceutical mechanism, is berberine. A randomized controlled trial published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism by researchers at Rujin Hospital in Shanghai, following 116 patients with type 2 diabetes, compared berberine to metformin over 3 months. The berberine group showed a 2 percentage point reduction in their 3-month blood sugar average and a 28% reduction in fasting insulin, comparable to metformin through a non-pharmaceutical entry point. The magnitude is different. That is precisely why berberine is a daily dietary addition and not a prescription intervention. Not generic berberine powder with undefined alkaloid concentration. Not a supplement that lists berberine without specifying its standardization protocol. Standardized berberine extract with documented active compound content. That is what the trial used. That is the distinction the research makes. The second compound for VEGF interception downstream at the receptor level, EGCG, epigallocatchin gallate, from ceremonial-grade green tea. Researchers publishing in the journal Nature documented that EGCG inhibited blood vessel growth in laboratory assays using the same methodology used to test pharmaceutical angiogenesis inhibitor candidates. The findings were described as comparable to some experimental cancer drugs in anti-angiogenic effect. Not bottled tea, not generic extract. Ceremonial-grade green tea standardized for EGCG concentration. That is the distinction the assay literature makes. For natural killer cell support, standardized Korean red ginseng, specifically the ginsonoside fraction that research has examined for immune activation. Not Siberian ginseng, which is a different plant with a different compound profile. Panax ginseng, Korean red ginseng, standardized. For the chronic inflammatory burden, depleting the Akkermansia-friendly gut. Environment, Himalayan mountain ginger, standardized for its active anti-inflammatory fraction. For the visceral fat, producing the inflammatory cytokines, suppressing the patrol at the source. Seville orange peel extract, standardized for P-synephrine, not ephedrine, which is structurally distinct and carries cardiovascular risk at clinical doses. P-synephrine, a different compound, a different mechanism, a different safety profile. Berberine addresses the insulin signal. EGCG intercepts the VEGF cascade downstream. Korean red ginseng supports the natural killer cell patrol. Himalayan mountain ginger reduces the inflammatory burden. P-synephrine targets the visceral fat driving the cytokines at the source. It is not one mechanism. It is a cascade, and it starts with one capsule. I put together the protocol I would hand to a patient walking out of my office. Because I have spent 34 years watching people work harder than they ever should have had to against a villain they did not know how to name. The closest commercially available formula to what the clinical research actually supports for adults over 60 is in the pinned comment below this video. I use and recommend this because it addresses all 4 insulin lock pathways simultaneously. 1 capsule, 1 full glass of water, every morning before breakfast. But the research on compounds is only half of the picture. It is what happened to the patients who addressed Insulin Lock with this protocol. What changed in their actual lab numbers? What changed in the daily experience of bodies that had been working against a villain they finally had a name for? Let me tell you about Walter. Walter is 67, Portland, Oregon. For 8 months, Walter had been adding the foods the research pointed to. Kiwis, green tea, broccoli sprouts, pomegranate juice. His physician had flagged his fasting insulin as borderline at 2 consecutive annual visits. Not explained. Walter kept adding foods and waiting for a number to move. Nothing moved. What Walter did not know was that his fasting insulin, sitting at 18 microunits per milliliter, was running at full capacity beneath every intervention he was adding. He was not doing it wrong. He was building defenses on top of an unaddressed insulin lock that was working against every one of them. After 12 weeks on the protocol, his fasting insulin dropped from 18 microunits per milliliter to 9. His systemic inflammation marker fell from 3.4 to 1.1 milligrams per liter. Below 1.0 is what the American Heart Association defines as low cardiovascular. Inflammatory risk. His physician reviewed the 12-week panel and for the first time in 2 years did not use the word borderline. For the first time in 2 years, I walked out of that appointment without that word following me home. I finally understood what was working against everything I was adding and I finally understood why nothing moved until I addressed it at the source. Margaret is 73, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. No family history of cancer. Annual panels described as acceptable for 6 consecutive years. Her insulin resistance score sat at 3.1, technically within a range her physician did not flag as a priority. Never connected, in any appointment she had attended, to the natural killer cell impairment or the VEGF environment I described in this video. Margaret had assumed that at 73, the window had narrowed past the point where it mattered. After 12 weeks, her insulin resistance score fell from 3.1 to 1.8. Her fasting glucose moved from 108 milligrams per deciliter to 94. Without prompting, told her that her metabolic markers looked more consistent with someone a decade younger. The window narrows. It does not close. Not at 73. Not based on what my numbers show now. Robert is 65. Charlotte, North Carolina. Managing type 2 diabetes for 6 years. His endocrinologist had mentioned, in passing, that metabolic health was relevant to his cancer monitoring schedule. The specific connection between his insulin resistance and the 4 pathways I described had never been drawn explicitly in any appointment. Robert brought the berberine randomized controlled trial data to his next endocrinology appointment. His physician confirmed the mechanism, adjusted the monitoring schedule, and gave clearance to add the protocol alongside his existing medication. After 16 weeks, under physician supervision, his 3-month blood sugar average fell from 7.4% to 6.8%. No medication changes had been made. His endocrinologist described the result as unexpectedly clean. I took the research to my doctor. He read it, he understood it. Conversation I did not know I was allowed to start is the reason it worked. 3 patients, 3 different starting points, 3 different objections. One consistent pattern. When the upstream cause is addressed, the downstream numbers move. But here is what drives the hardest urgency in what I have described. The calculation most people do not run until it has already moved against them. Before I show you exactly what the annual biological cost of waiting looks like, scroll down right now and look at the pinned comment directly below this video. The link to the exact protocol is there. The first comment you will see when you scroll down. Come back, because what I am about to describe about the narrowing window is the piece that changes how you read every year that passes without addressing this. I have placed the link to the exact product I reference in this protocol in the pinned comment directly below this video. The pinned comment is the first thing you will see when you scroll down. Everything you need is there. Imagine waking up with the knowledge that your natural killer cell patrol is operating at its designed capacity, not reduced by 40 to 50% from the visceral fat Insulin Lock has been building. Imagine a metabolic environment where the VEGF signal is not chronically elevated, or the construction permit office for tumor blood vessels is operating at the rate your biology was designed to maintain. Imagine your gut carrying the Akkermansia levels that research at the Gustav Rusi Cancer Center identified as the difference between an immune system that responds and one that does not. On the other hand, if Insulin Lock continues without intervention, elevated VEGF creates a vascular environment more accessible to microscopic tumor clusters. Suppressed natural killer cell activity means fewer of those clusters are eliminated before they find that environment. And depleted Akkermansia means the immune system cannot execute its most precise response when it is needed. Each process compounds the others. Over years, this cycle tightens. The protocol breaks the cycle at the metabolic level. Not for tonight, for the years that determine whether this window stays open. Every year after 60 that Insulin Lock operates unaddressed, research suggests natural killer cell cytotoxic activity continues its documented decline. VEGF production continues to intensify, and Akkermansia populations continue to erode. These are the three systems standing between a microscopic cancer cluster and a dangerous one. The biology does not pause while you decide. The only question left is whether you are going to give your body's cancer defense systems the metabolic foundation they have been waiting for, or leave Insulin Lock in place for one more year. The research is already in the journals. The protocol is specific. The link is in a pinned comment. The only variable left is whether you use it. Here is what we have covered. After 60, a process called Insulin Lock becomes one of the most significant. Saboteurs of your body's natural cancer defense systems. Not because it causes cancer, because it dismantles the mechanisms designed to stop it before it starts. Insulin Lock upregulates VEGF, the protein tumors use to build blood vessels into themselves. A tumor isolated from blood supply stays frozen at 1 to 2 millimeters for years. Vascularized 16,000 times its size in 14 days. Insulin Lock suppresses natural killer cell activity through visceral fat-driven inflammatory signaling. Research documents reductions of 40 to 50% compared to metabolically healthy adults of the same age. Insulin Lock elevates insulin-like growth factor 1. Researchers at Harvard School of Public Health found a 4.3 times higher prostate cancer risk in the highest compared to the lowest IGF-1 quartile, published in the journal Science, following nearly 15,000 men. Insulin Lock depletes Akkermansia mucinophila. Research at the Gustav Ralsei Cancer Center, published in the journal Science, identified Akkermansia as the single most significant predictor of immunotherapy response in cancer patients. The compounds that address all four pathways: standardized berberine for the insulin signal, standardized EGCG from ceremonial grade green tea for the VEGF cascade, Korean red ginseng for natural killer cell support, Himalayan mountain ginger for the inflammatory burden, and phenylephrine from Seville orange peel for the visceral fat at the source. Protocol: 1 capsule, 1 full glass of water every morning before breakfast. Your body already has every system I described. Insulin Lock has been working against all of them. The research is specific. The protocol is specific. The villain has a name. And once you know its name, you stop losing the fight. I have pinned a comment directly below this video with the exact product, the exact protocol, and the exact timing written out in plain language. It is the first thing you will see when you scroll down. Everything you need is there. Do not wait.